Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Appsec Engineer Podcast. It's been a while since I met all of you. You've been probably seeing a lot of chime in for today's episode. Two people that I really kind of look up to in terms of talking about podcasts and talking about things that we're doing here at Appsec Engineer. So today is one of those episodes where we're going to really talk about the other side of application security, which is not the technology side, but more in terms of the community side of Appsec, in terms of what goes on building a community, what goes on in terms of what are the kind of trends that we're seeing? What is it that people like to see? What is it that people like to know about? And much more of such interesting questions. So for those of you who've not been under the rock in AppSec, you would have heard of the OWASP Devslop community. And today we've got Nikki and Nancy from OWASP Devslop. Hello. Thanks for joining us.
Hello. Thank you for inviting us.
No problem. I mean, we've been talking for a while, Nancy, and we wanted to do this. So I'm glad you kind of chimed in, and thanks for joining us too, Nikki.
Hey guys, good to be here.
Awesome. So what we're going to do today, we just talked before we started recording. I have a ton of questions around the whole community side of application security, right? I mean, we're just starting this very, very recently with us here at Before AppSec Engineer, but one of the channels that I've been personally kind of following for a while has been the Devslop community and the kind of shows that you've been doing. So we kind of start off with really the kind of genesis of OWASP Devslop and what is it that you wanted to kind of achieve with the community? Where did it all start off from? Just a little history lesson, if you will.
Yeah, so the history is actually kind of a good story. For about, I guess, maybe almost a decade, I spent a lot of time writing crappy web apps that were, intentionally vulnerable just for training, for people to sort of learn their skills, test out Burp or Zap or something like that, and spent a lot of time doing that. And one of them I published, it was a vulnerable Rails app, like maybe, 8 or 9 years ago. And Tanya Janka, who I think most of the community knows really well, sent me an email, like an SOS email, an hour before she was supposed to do a demo saying, I don't know you, but all of a sudden, your Rails site is down. Can you bring it up? Because I have a demo in an hour. And I was like, whoa, people are actually using this thing? I had no idea. So I got myself together, pulled it back up, got it back up, and I think she hit her demo. So that's how Tanya and I met. And then, we were all at OWASP AppSec 2018 in Belfast. And, I see Tanya in real life and I was like, I think you're the person that emailed me. And she was like, yeah, I emailed you. And then she's like, here's Nancy. And I was like, hey, Nancy. So we all sort of met like about 2.5 years ago. I guess it's like 3 years ago now. Was it 2017?
It was 2017 in Belfast, yes.
All right. So that's like almost 4 years ago now. Yeah, wow.
Yeah,
right. My clock is off. Yeah. Yeah. So we sort of met like that. And then we were like, hey, there's probably a lot more we can do here in terms of, showing off. I think we try to take that approach where it's like, let's like demo things and show things and like show off things that can go wrong and nothing has to be perfect. And we're not perfect, and we sort of took that approach and we kind of came up with this idea to like, build out either a tool, a software, something, and then, I'll let Nancy sort of chime in here on her contributions. Yeah. She took it way further.
But also, Nikki, wasn't it the time where we started, at least for me, I started to hear more about DevOps practices, and that also what triggered you and Tanya to start the project or to found the project was DevOps, because you called the project Devslop, didn't you?
Yeah, that's true. We were like, a lot of people were building out pipelines, including the organizations I was working for at the time. And I was like, wait a second, I don't know if I really understand what's going on here. Like, what's a pipeline? I mean, I get it at a high level, but I got to implement it to really understand it. And then it was like, oh, you could plug in all these security features. Like, what do they look like? How does this work? How do you like get this right in a large organization? There's culture, there's soft skills, there's all sorts of things. So yeah, we tried to like get our heads under that problem and really deeply understand like what dev actually means. What does it mean to shift the community in that direction or the developer community in that direction? What does it mean for security? I think we felt things were changing and we wanted to understand where the puck was headed.
Yeah.
And you've probably seen DevSecOps move from SecDevOps to DevSecOps to rugged DevOps. I don't know what they call it anymore. You could call it Susie for all. It doesn't really matter anymore. It's been what?
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, your screen is frozen though, but you're here. I can hear you.
I'm gonna refresh StreamYard. I'm refreshing StreamYard.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
No, I was just saying that you've probably seen the entire stream of DevSecOps, right? Ever since you started. What was it? I mean, what is your earliest recollection of the first reference of the phrase DevSecOps? Was it 20? For me, it was 2016 or 2015 RSA. That's when the first reference of DevSecOps actually happened. I think it was Shannon Leeds or somebody who kind of spoke about it the first time in the DevSecOps RSA. I mean,
I think it was Shannon actually doing the keynote at Belfast,
right?
At Global AppSec Belfast. She was actually, so for me, I think Belfast was the first time I heard about DevSecOps. And I also, we'll talk maybe about this later, but I don't have an AppSec background, right? I was curious. I was just starting my AppSec journey at that point. So I pretty much heard about AppSec and DevSecOps at the same time back in 2017. So yeah, so that's how they got curious about DevSecOps and started Devslop. I was new and met Tanya. Tanya and I come from the same city in Canada, in Ottawa. We both work at the government at the time, and she was just starting. It was even before She Hacks Purple, right? In Belfast, Tanya was not She Hacks Purple.
Yeah, she was Tanya.
So she was Tanya Jenka.
Yeah.
Her first international talk, right? So anyway, so I was not really part of the project. I just saw Nikki and Tanya meeting and being very excited about the whole thing and starting the project. And eventually Tanya needed help and I started chiming in and just helping in the background. And as she worked for Microsoft as a developer advocate, it was easier for her to create content and keep up DevSlop. But when she left Microsoft, that wasn't the case anymore. So I joined the project as a project leader back in 2018. And when she actually left the leadership of the project at the end of 2019, I said, okay, so we need to do either we continue consistently or we end the project, right? Like, what are we going to do with this thing? And I don't know what you think, Nikki, but I feel like DevSlop is also an uncommon project, right? Like, it's not a documentation project.
Yeah.
It's not a tool project. It's not a code project. And for a while, even for myself, people were asking, like, what is DevSlop? I'm like, I'm not sure. We're just, we're figuring it out. But what I decided to focus on early 2020 was the show modules that we called. And what it consists of is basically inviting a subject matter expert talking about a specific problem space and how they integrated security into their DevOps practices. So we talk cloud security, we talk infrastructure security, AppSec as well, a bit everywhere, right? And I think that was new because the OWASP community is used to talk about pure AppSec, but talking about cloud security is a bit new. To talk about Kubernetes, we address a few new topics. So there's a mix of that during the show. But yeah, early 2020 was when we started doing the shows consistently.
Right. Just curious, how many, do you kind of remember the number of guests you've had on the show, just the top of your mind? Or you have it, obviously you have it written somewhere, I know.
Somewhere I could probably count it down, but
I think it was like 60 back in November. So let's just add 20 now. So maybe it's like 80 to 100. It's estimation there, but.
Right.
Yeah.
Which also, congratulations on the award with the DevSecOn Community Initiative Award, right? That was it 2020? This happened recently, right?
Yes, it was for 2020, but we received the award. It was announced, I think 2 weeks ago, sometime in March, 2021, but it was for our work during 2020. So yeah, the year where we pretty much decided to consistently go live, not weekly. The plan was not weekly, but it was almost weekly.
Right. No, I completely get it because, like I said, we just started off doing this, and there's a lot of work that goes around in kind of building a show like this, right? I mean, and it's not just a show; it's a community. It's kind of getting the topics aligned, ensuring that it's agnostic at the same time. It's something that's relevant. So I think, what do you see? So for people who want to, ever since the pandemic kind of hit us, right? Everybody's doing podcasts, everybody's doing a lot of these things. But what is it that you think are the non-negotiable cornerstones of building an AppSec community in today's context? What is it that you think is that secret sauce in terms of really keeping people engaged? Because you can bring people in, but then keeping them engaged is another thing, right? So what do you think are people wanting to really kind of have a bite of?
I'm not sure if it's specific to AppSec, but I've definitely noticed a difference when we started being consistent. I keep repeating that because that really was the game changer, right? Not going live a week and not hearing from us for a month and a half and then coming back. So the fact that we had a schedule, it was almost every Sunday at 1 p.m., sometimes at 5:30, but we started back at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So it was a habit basically that people had to come and watch the show. So I think that was the main game changer. And other than that, I would say that we had fun. Like we're all interested in these topics. We're genuinely interested. And whether there were 5 people watching or 25 or 100 or 1,000 views, I enjoyed this time spent with Nikki and Tanya at the time as well, and the guest talking about these topics. So a genuine interest, the fact that it's a Sunday, understanding that it shouldn't feel like a classroom, or it shouldn't feel like a lecture, and we're here to have fun, to learn something new, but not taking ourselves too seriously, but also not taking ourselves seriously, but doing serious work, like just how we took care of the podcast and being consistent with it. Those are the things that I think makes a difference. And about the pandemic, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah. No, finish on.
I was just going to say about the pandemic, I think it was an advantage for us, the fact that like we were already doing what everybody's starting to do now. I think a few communities stopped and like, what are we going to do? We can't meet anymore. And we just kept going. And we just kept going, see them catch up, kind of understanding, if everybody's doing that, we're going to have to switch it up. And that's where we started inviting more guests, more co-hosts, just to make sure that we were not just another podcast with guests with the slides.
So ironically, it's funny that the problem that we had with the pandemic, though, is that you suddenly had a lot of speakers who wanted to speak. And now it was about having to really weed off the ones that were not interesting, right? How do you say no to a lot of them? Because now everybody's at home and they're like, I can speak, I can present. Like then as community owners, you need to then kind of really choose, right? So I was just curious in terms of what your selection criteria are.
Yeah, but not only that, I felt like the same speakers the best speakers were going to this different communities, and the same talk was in every community's YouTube channel. So, something was off about that. Something needed to change. So go ahead.
Yeah, and I think another thing that we try to aim for is like, listen, we all like understand that there's a lot of different tools and things you can choose from in the cybersecurity space. There's point solutions, there's new products, there's new open source products. There's just a variety of things out there. And I think that we learned really quickly that our audience, not even necessarily our audience, I think this is definitely driven by our audience, but I think people in the security space, it's really great to watch a tool or like learn how a tool functions like in a really short amount of time. So if you're hearing all about a certain type of, tool that's out there or a security product that's out there, like what does it actually do? You can go to the website, you could get through the marketing and then try to drill into actually what it does. But it's really cool to just like watch, real people in the real world trying to actually do this thing or implement this thing and figure it out. And you could actually learn a lot and just sort of like narrow down like how you reason that what that tool is. So I think we definitely focus on that learning outcome objective here, which is like at the end of this hour, we hope that you understand this thing incrementally better. And I think we're really deeply committed to like making sure that that happens, but in a fun way. And, listen, it doesn't always go to plan, but we try to keep it running along that path as much as possible, like really driven on like, we want you to learn something. And like, it's cool to be a beginner, be intermediate, be super advanced, whatever you want, like whoever you are. But we really want you to just kind of like learn like, hey, what is this thing? Like I heard all about like infrastructure as code checking tools. Like what are these things? How do they work? Like, I don't know. Like, so that's sort of like where we like to focus on.
Something I haven't but something I haven't mentioned a lot and talked to Nikki is also the credibility. I think Nikki adds a lot to that, to the podcast as a practitioner, as somebody extremely technical, like the conversation that she has with her guests, right? I find that it brings the conversation elsewhere. And I can even see like when she asks a question to her guests, like their eyes light up because they're like, oh, she gets it. right? And having that credibility.
That's very kind, but...
No, it's true.
Yeah.
Like you can
We're
tell.
all learners
like, even,
here, but yeah.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. Like, and they're every speakers, but when they, and it's not, comparing, but it's just, you ask a question to speaker, they're trying to teach you, but then Nikki comes in with a question and they're like, oh, I'm talking to a peer. Like, I'm not just trying to teach someone that doesn't know anything about my field. She actually gets what we're talking about. And I think we get a range of different audience because of that, the beginners, but also more advanced users and practitioners, because they're like, oh, it's not just about the AppSec 101. We're actually discussing problems that happen in real life. And that definitely, I need to credit Nikki for that.
Yeah, and I completely agree, because that's one of the things that I've loved about the Devslop is, and that's pretty much something that we kind of closely relate to, is it's relevant and it's practical hands-on, right? It's not just people wheeling off theory. There's always something quantifiable that you kind of get at the end of that episode. And that's really something that's quite interesting. I do have some serious questions after this, but before that, I wanted to kind of understand who does your media package. I'm a big fan of the posts that you do on Twitter and things like that. So who comes up with that? What's going on there?
Okay. You want our secrets? Okay. No, I have a great relationship with a graphic designer, and I come up with concept. I give him like inspiration, but I can't take credit, but because he reads my mind. I pretty much tell him something and he comes up with different topics.
These are great. Those you never miss a Devslop episode on your timeline. You know what I mean? It always is. There's something about it that you just can't watch above, right? You always kind of grabs your attention, and it's tastefully done. It's fun. It's vibrant. I think it also kind of really kind of resonates that whole perception of what Devslop is. So I think huge shout out to the freelancer, whoever it is, unnamed. So we'll keep him as the unnamed one. We don't want others kind of biting him off.
No, but I'll add that branding was very important to the project, right? Like, it's part of the consistency that I'm talking about, right? That our post on a timeline is recognizable. And at first, I think that was what grabbed attention more than content. It's like, oh, this fun project where there's a bunch of ladies talking about AppSec. That's fun. But suddenly people started listening and it became more than that. But I think a lot of it started with branding, and it was a way to show that we were taking this project seriously, I think, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So I want to one of the things I wanted to do today was to if I were to consider, there were some questions that I had, if I were to kind of consider the Devslop project to be this, or rather your insights from the Devslop project to be something that an AppSec practitioner could kind of glean as a trend, if you will. So a couple of questions there. So for over these 100 guests that you've had on your shows, if you were to kind of really kind of look back and say, and if you were to kind of draw an inference to say what the future could look like, just curious in terms of what kind of topics are you seeing garner the most interest and also have and do justice to that interest in terms of views, in terms of people commenting, in terms of engagement per se, and more importantly, what are the topics that garner a lot of interest, yes, but don't really stand up to its engagement as much as it did with interest. I'll give you an example. In my experience, one example of the latter is threat modeling. Right? We've always seen a lot of interest garner in threat modeling when you talk about it, when you kind of really, really put a lot of posts around it, but you don't really see the rubber meet the road when you actually see people adopting it and things like that, right? But I was just kind of curious, you've had this 100 guests or 80 guests. So do you kind of topics and domains that you think are of most interest and probably least interest at this point in time?
I'll take it. I got it. So I think, I think there's a few topics here that tend to generate the more interest. I think one is just cloud security, which is a really nebulous, pun intended term, but like it's a big term, right? It's a big domain. What is cloud security? There's a lot of different things that means, but I think whenever you slice up a little sliver of cloud security, I think a lot of people are interested. I think there's a lot of people out there that are working for organizations that are either fully developing in the cloud or on the cloud or moving totally in the cloud. So there's just like an enormous amount of interest around that domain. I think another area is bug finding and bug hunting. I think there's just like a sexiness around that where people are just sort of captivated by how this works and how they could hunt, either hit bug bounty programs or do their own bug bounty or bug hunting or just bug finding. So I think those two areas, I think, generate most of the, or in my perception of the higher engagement shows.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do you think are the topics that probably need a little bit more evangelizing, or you think it's too early, or it's probably ahead of the game at this point in time?
That's a good question. Like, where is this thing headed? I think, we've talked a little bit about this. Like, I think, AppSec culture, security teams, the relationship between security and developers, like that's a timeless discussion that we all have, as security professionals. But I think there's a lot of room there to engage more with developer communities and security communities to at least tell stories on how that relationship has been improved or enhanced over, different types of companies, large enterprises, small startups, et cetera. It's a lot of, I think the industry matters and the company size matters. So I think we do want to focus a little bit more on that. It's a very soft skill, right? So, it's not necessarily a technical skill, but it has a lot of technical value. Other areas that I think are interesting, Kubernetes. I mean, everybody seems to love to talk about Kubernetes these days, right? There's an enormous amount of complexity in there. I find myself, sort of struggling to keep up with what's going on in there, but, really excited to learn. So I think people, again, I'm assuming they're faced with large scale Kubernetes deployments and working with them and developing on them. And they're kind of like, do I really have this covered end to end? Do I really know everything? Is there something I could do better? I think just normal questions like that might be things that our audience might want to see in the future. That's just my opinion, though. So
Sure.
If I go back to more of the statistics, like the Meetup RSVPs and the YouTube analytics, right? I would say that anything that's pure AppSec and even the foundation of AppSec, if you put OWASP Top 10 in the title, I know we'll have a big crowd. Like Nikki mentioned, also anything that's more offensive, that's more sexy than other topic, offensive security more than defensive security. So we try to balance that out. We are a DevOps, DevSecOps project, but I do find that when we talk about pure AppSec project and beginner foundational project, that's where we attract. So that makes me think that we're not, the industry is still maybe not new, but there's a lot of people just trying to get in and understand the foundation of AppSec, because that's really where we get the most of our audience. And yeah.
Right. No, great segue for one of the other questions that I had. When you talked about people getting into AppSec, one of the things that the larger objective of AppSec Engineer as a brand, and even for this podcast, is really to kind of bridge the gap between skill and certifications in the application security community, right? Because there's one of the things we're still seeing is a lot of career opportunities in AppSec, but you're not necessarily seeing that trickle down towards actually filling those positions, right? You still have a lot of those openings up there, and people are still always like, we've still not got the right candidate. So there's always that something missing in an AppSec professional. So again, just leaning off of your experience of meeting people, looking at the domain and things like that, what would be your one piece of advice to somebody who's just starting off in AppSec, and B, somebody who wants to kind of better himself or herself in the AppSec value chain, in terms of learning, in terms of skilling, whatever it is? I mean, because we've got these two personas always come back to us, right? You either have somebody who wants to get into AppSec. They could be somebody from the developer community, they could be from QA, they could be from, I don't know, DevOps, or there could be somebody who's, somebody who's put in like 3-4 years in AppSec, and now they're thinking of where can I go from here? So any advice to these specific two personas of people based on what you're seeing in terms of trends and things like that?
I think that's for you, Nikki.
So I think getting into AppSec. So This is such a hard question to answer. I think if you're coming from nothing, like, or not nothing, but if you're coming from, this is your first job and you sort of have a technology background, I think the best way to sort of really understand AppSec deeply is to develop software and just be on the other side of the equation, right? And learn like a lot of these new, or I guess they're not new anymore, but just learn like a lot of the new web development paradigms that are going on out there and deeply understand them. If you're already a developer and you want to get more into AppSec, I think I would say like it could help to learn other areas of cybersecurity, like to help contextualize your understanding of application security. So networking, cloud, because all of those things like are really like, we're butting up on like massive adjacencies between these different domains. So I think just having that cross-domain knowledge is super helpful, especially to even like identity and access management protocols, OAuth, SAML, things like that. I think all of those things kind of help well-round a developer who then wants to get more into security and a security person that doesn't have development experience. I always feel like you should just like kind of hit it from the opposite angle to try to figure out, to just get more domain depth. I don't know if that makes sense, but I hope
it does. It does, because there's always one slide in all of my presentations, at least that I do, which says we've for years bantered about developers needing to understand security, but it's about time we said that the security teams need to get code, right? And we keep talking about automation, we keep talking about these great things with integration, but if you kind of really look at it, the lowest common denominator of automation is a piece of code, right? So code times n is automation if you really kind of break it down that way. So I think it's about time that security professionals really kind of took to code, because I think I completely endorse that thought. I completely get what you're saying. So it's about that cross-functional integration between dev and security from a skill perspective. Yeah,
and you also are able to understand the plight. It's not the right word, plight, the journey of the developer, pressure. The developers are under pressure, just like security people are under pressure. It's maybe different pressure. It may come out in different ways, but just that empathy across the line there on like who is the person that just wrote that code and what kind of pressure are they under. You should understand that if you want to be a good security professional, or if you want to be a good application security professional, because you're going to have to interact with them. You're going to have to coach them or support them. And that relationship needs to work. And I think it only works if you really understand like how they work. And yeah, I agree with you completely. So it's our job to understand, developers more so than I think even developers should understand security. And I think we default to developers need to understand security. We're going to turn them into security people. Are we really? Is that really something that'll work? I'm not sure. I don't have the answers to these questions, but
yeah. How relevant that is, but I think it was yesterday actually, because part of what I do with Devslop is also connect with other communities and try to make sure that it's not always the same names and faces that we see. So diversity is important for me. So I connected with someone from Women Who Code Cloud, and she was telling me about her background, 15 years as a developer in .NET, extremely competent and smart. And, one of the first questions I always ask is, do you know about OWASP? And she's like, very, very vaguely understanding, knowing what it was. So it's always surprising. In the last 3 years, ever since I've been introduced to OWASP, for 3-4 years, it's easy to forget that not everybody knows about application security, and even people that you would expect know about that. And even myself, like now I keep talking about application security program, but I need to remember that when I first heard about OWASP, where I work, we didn't even have an AppSec security program, and that's not something new. There's still a lot of workplaces where there's no program per se. So I feel like security also needs to communicate more, and but having security professionals speak at developer conferences with builders and instead of talking to ourselves, go elsewhere and outreach. And I know that's something that OWASP has been trying to do for a long time. I think there's still a lot of work to do there, because it's hard to understand how somebody can be in a field for so long and and have a successful career and never have heard about some very foundational principle that I'm not a builder, I'm not a developer, and I would teach them and reference and give them advice on where to find information on how to do their job securely. That's really odd. So I think there's something we need to change about that as well.
Interesting. Yeah. And one of the, guilty as charged when we kind of do make hires for junior positions in application security, right? The most toughest questions to answer are the most simplest ones, right? So if somebody comes and asks me, hey, I want to get into application security, can you give me 5 links that I can go through? I have OWASP, and I really don't know what the other 4 are, because looking back, I really can't think of, because our journeys in AppSec have been so organic. It's never been like a lesson plan, right? It's never been like, okay, you go here first, learn about software security conceptually here, then you jump there for something else. So I don't know. Do you have what would your kind of 5 top of your mind links be for somebody who wants to just read about AppSec? Do you have something like that? I'm just curious. It's not part of my questions today, but since we kind of touched upon it, I'm curious.
Yeah.
I know. We call dibs on OWASP.
I guess part of me would. Yeah. You call dibs on OWASP. I think the next thing I would say is, write a web app. Like literally try to make your own web app. It could be super basic. Try to make a React app. I did that one weekend, and wow, I don't know. I just feel like that's how you really could start to understand, okay, this is the goal of AppSec, right? It's not always WebSec, but in this context, we'll just assume it is, but this is our goal. And so I don't know, how does it work? How do these people build these things? And what am I supposed to do? How do I secure this? What could go wrong during the building process? And then I feel like the wheels start to turn a little bit. You have context. You're like, oh, I'm pulling down all these packages from where? Where are they coming down from? Oh, wow. I guess that's what they mean by supply chain attacks, right? Because I don't know where these packages are coming from. And then you start writing some code and you're like, oh, I guess I could do it this way or that way. Oh, I have to take input from something else, a third party, a human, maybe something can go wrong there. And I feel like that doesn't answer your question about where the 5 links are at all. So I'm just going to stop myself. But that's how I would try to walk you down here, because I don't know of any other links. Yeah.
No, but it sounds like a great answer to a possible question could have been, what was the genesis of the Pixie project? Was that how it started, though?
Yeah,
Did how the Pixie project start?
Yeah, I just really wanted to learn Node and Angular, just that mean stack stuff. I was like, wait a second, JavaScript's really getting serious about itself. It's everywhere, right? What's going on? And I sort of just needed to understand that. So I was like, all right, it's actually really fun to write bad software, because you have to a lot of the frameworks now are trying to there's a lot of good guardrails in there, and then you have to undo these guardrails. So it's kind of cool. You're like, all right, how do I get cross-site scripting to execute in an Angular context? I gotta bypass a whole bunch of controls here, right? So you sort of have to learn that. And I feel like you learn interesting things about the other side of that, the creation of security when you're trying to bypass security. But yeah, I always just whenever I need to learn a topic that I really don't understand, I just feel like I need to have something that happens as a result of learning it. Otherwise I'm just reading things or watching YouTubes, and I'm like, what did I just learn? I got to put it into action. Otherwise it's just right out of my head. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's true. There's no clear learning path, I feel. Yeah. And I think that's something I think that's what you're trying to do with Appsec Engineer. And I find that when I try to look for resources to help someone get into AppSec, I find a lot of resources and learning platform on the offensive side of things, right? How to hack something. You can find 10 websites, but learning platform that are focused on building and defending and building securely are very rare. And I think the number 1 recommended book is the Web Application Hackers Handbook, right? Which is not a builder's handbook book, I would say. And I don't have resources for DevSecOps. I tend to recommend Julien Véran's book, Secure. I forget his book. I forget the book title, but Secure Véran's book. I think it was one of the first workbook that started from the beginning and taught you the foundation and how to build things securely. But other than that, I feel like we're overwhelmed with a bunch of platforms and resources on how to attack software, which is one way, but shouldn't be the only way. So.
And yeah, it is one way. Yeah. I feel like it drums up the excitement of like, ooh, hackers,
Yes.
And so, yeah, but I hear you. I don't know. I mean, for some people, it must work really well. And I think, maybe that's how I sort of kind of came up. I was like, I guess we're a lot older than these kids today that are learning in different ways, but, just sort of misusing software and trying to figure out how to misuse software. Right. So I think there is that angle where, unintended outcomes might lead you down a curiosity path. But I think to Nancy's point, if we want to build like robust AppSec engineers that know how to interface with, developers and, all sorts of people in an organization, it's a little bit beyond like, LOL, look at that cross-site scripting, there's a lot of skill that has to happen to get that communication across. So it's hard, and there's a soft skill aspect here that, I guess I don't know if we even teach that ever.
No,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I know I always say when somebody really if you want to kind of really look at the various pieces of an AppSec engineer's roles and responsibilities, 9 out of 10 times you would forget the soft skill bit of it, because you really need to be a people person to work in AppSec, because you're not just somebody who's just going to be heads down in your laptop or computer and just writing code or fixing issues, right? You've really got to manage people in multiple departments, especially if you're kind of working for a smaller shop,
or even a larger one. Yeah.
Yeah, all that. Yeah. So
totally.
People skills are absolutely interesting. While Nancy, you were talking about learning about AppSec, I think there was a certain innocence in a Google search that we've lost, because today, if there's somebody genuinely who wants to say, where can I learn fundamentals of application security, there's a 90% chance that he or she is going to be routed to a SaaS platform, where the marketers have bid that particular search phrase and said fundamentals of application security, source code analysis, and they'll be like, what? Right? So there's really, so I don't think Google search would help anybody get into could get those things. But I'm actually thinking out loud. I mean, we really don't have resources for somebody to just learn application security, even if they don't want to go through programs. Even all that they want to do is read.
Yeah.
Right. And I wonder maybe if somebody from OWASP is watching this, right, at some point in time, even within the OWASP community, if there could just be like articles that could be arranged in a fashion for people to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes. That's great.
I think the content is there, the learning path is not there.
Right.
Because, and I think you can see it, and I just thought about this. If you're in the Slack of the OWASP Foundation, you have a bunch of newbies coming into the community Slack and saying, I'm new to AppSec, where do I get started? And like, if you just look at the website, they're probably overwhelmed by the amount of information, because I'm pretty sure there's nothing that needs to be reinvented. The information is out there, and the links are sometimes, I was in another Slack channel, and they were sending me a bunch of links on the foundation of AppSec and application security, and they're like from 2015 and 2014, and they're still valid. So the information is out there, but where to start with? I think you mentioned that a bit earlier, Rahul, is that you kind of figured out your path. And if we don't have a learning path or a direction to give, and we should be able to say, okay, start there. And you might, or, having modules and saying, this is the type of things that you should learn, and go one by one and have some more direction than we have right now, because it can be overwhelming. And I'm convinced that it's not the lack of information, because all the time I find gems in the OWASP website, and I'm like, I didn't even know that existed, right? So it's there, but we don't point it out to people, and we don't have a learning path to direct them to, I feel.
Yeah. I think, like I said, if somebody in OWASP can just put these things together and just create interlinks in a way that people can look for, I think that would be great. Well, talking about DevSecOps and automation and things like that, right? We've talked about the fact that the whole DevSecOps phrase has been kind of changed over a period of 4 or 5 years. But that apart, what do you think are, or rather, if you have more than one, great, but do you think there is anything in DevSecOps that's A, overemphasized, or B, underemphasized. Because one of the things that I kind of talk about with my marketing or sales team is you always have the problem of DevSecOps being this castles in the air where anybody who's listening to the various possibilities of AppSec automation is immediately going to be, they're going to be sold more than what they need to be sold on, right? They're going to be like, okay, it's this magic pill that's going to solve a lot of things in AppSec, right? And so you're always kind of focusing on those really easily achievable aspects of AppSec when you talk about DevSecOps. And I feel that's where people are really concentrating a lot of talks on. But again, I want to get your perspective of what you think is one overemphasized aspect of DevSecOps and a really underestimated or an underdog of DevSecOps that people don't necessarily talk about as much. Nikki, do you want to go first?
Yeah. I think the sec part is I'm going to be careful with my words here, but I think the sec part is not as automatable as we would all love and wish and expect it to be. I think we tend to fall for, we're automating everything away and it's all going to be easy peasy. And, it's just not that simple, right? False positive rates are pretty high. What tool, does it have enough context? Are you triaging these bugs right? Who's doing that? How do you contextualize that? Is that really a critical or is that a low? I think there's a lot of gaps there still in how we ingest and or triage security related data. And I think that automation is helping, but it's not like some sort of like magic bullet here, right? In terms of, solving security sort of out of the box. I think we as an industry are always waiting for this like, mystical, magical bullet that is never going to arrive. I mean, I used to think it was coming, but I guess it still hasn't come. I don't know if it ever is coming, but I think there is that. And I think that's just something we fall for iteration after iteration of security technology, right? We somehow think that this is the thing that's going to solve it. And then we are like let down, and then we sort of put our, dust off the dirt here and then get back on the horse. And then it happens again in 5 years. So I think that's just who we are as a community, or maybe there's just some magical technology that really hasn't been invented yet. But yeah, I think that's one of the things that we don't talk enough about is like, what can you capably and reliably automate from a security perspective, reliably and consistently, and ROI that in a way that meets your business's objectives. I think we still have ways to go there. Well, yeah. I forgot the other side of your question.
The other one was what is it that
what's
you
working?
Just keep talking? What you just to keep talking? It's overemphasized, right? You can't. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
That you're talking
All
about
right,
it
I
so
answered
much.
it. Yeah. Yeah.
Nancy?
Yeah, I guess what you said we were not talking about enough, I think Nicole mentioned that as well, was the soft skills necessary, that there are plenty of tools but that work, but they're not the solution, and you may implement them and you might still have issues. So I think soft skills, it's processes and people are also part of making a solution successful, and we're not talking about that, and we're trying to make the. And it happened even on the show, right, where I'm very impressed about a tool, and then I go back home and I try it. I'm like, oh, it actually, like, there's things that don't work as well, or there are gaps, right? Like there are gaps. They're like, but what about that? What about my context? What about and I used to ask, and I still do, but ask, why are they still trying to build another IAM tool, another cloud security tool? Why are there so many that seem to be doing the same? Oh, we check about CIS control. I'm like, why another one? It's because I feel like everybody's they realize that they need a customized solution, and it's not that easy to automate, and everybody has a different context that is hard to document, right? But I do like the policy as code or everything as code trend, even if it's not a bit like threat modeling that you were talking about. We love talking about it, but I don't see it in the field as much, like policy as code and things like that. Yeah. I love the idea of it, but I haven't seen it in my workplace. But I like that because I feel like it's a great way for us to define our requirements and to make sure that we're we're talking the same language and that we're talking about the same thing, and there's a fail and there's a pass. Instead of, I do a lot of document review and interviewing people to assess controls, and I love the policy as code movement and the promise of it, because I feel like it would be a way for me when I talk to an engineer that we're like, the code would be the language we both speak, and make sure that we're talking about the same thing, because sometimes just the vocabulary or just reading a control, I'm not sure that we're talking about the same thing. So yeah.
But back to your other question about, and I totally agree with you, Nancy, but back to your other question about why is AppSec so hard for beginners to get into? I think this just illustrates it. It's scope creep. AppSec is like a continual amount of scope creep, right? So now we're bringing in policy and compliance and infrastructure, right? That's all becoming code now, which is that, whose job is that? Is that the AppSec team? It sounds like it. It sounds like it's code. And I feel like, as we keep evolving the domain into something larger and larger and larger, it creates like, a higher learning curve for newcomers to come in. And I think that's like on us to figure out something to do there. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that one.
No,
but,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's anybody's guess, but I think just like many things in AppSec, I think you can only kind of do like a best guesstimate of what's gonna happen. And one of the things that I get asked a lot, which I'm gonna kind of put on you, is if you were to consider the last decade as the decade that gave us AppSec automation, put application security gave it prime time in product engineering, if you will, right? If that was the decade that was last, what do you think resides for AppSec in the next 5 years? What is your hunch in terms of what's going to be the next big thing in AppSec? Is it learning, skilling? Is it, I don't know, things like more tooling, more, or now that we have tools, is it something around managing vulnerability? So where would you put your money on the AppSec poker table?
Want to go first, Nikki?
Sure. I think, I guess you could divide this up into, there's going to be technical problems, and then there's going to be, sort of the people problems of AppSec, or just building the AppSec career. I think some of the technical problems probably are going to center around, expansion of things like Kubernetes and more of these cloud native orchestration frameworks that themselves have an enormous amount of complexity within, right? They're machines within machines within machines. I mean, we went pretty deep there. And then I think there might be other domains that sort of brush upon like application security, like, I don't know, data science areas and machine learning algorithms, and how do you validate that stuff? And is there an application security component there? Can that data be misused, or, or can you feed bad data into a model? I think there are some challenges, at least I have been looking at that in my professional, workplace, like around that area, and trying to figure out, well, who's responsible for this? Is this a data science problem, security problem? I don't actually have an answer for that one, right? So I think that there's going to be some good technical challenges coming up in the domain. And I think we're going to still live with the fact that we continue to expand this domain, right? And we're trying really hard to keep newcomers attracted to the field, right? But we're not that skilled at creating a good environment for newcomers to the field to feel welcome, right, to feel, like it's okay to be a beginner, it's okay to not know. I think we still struggle with that stuff in InfoSec more broadly, which is, the arrogance of InfoSec, right? And so, and I think that that's a challenge, and it's a problem for us as a community. And we have to, I mean, if we were so great, like, we wouldn't have all these stories to tell that have happened in the news over the last like 10 years, right? So obviously there's a lot to learn here. So I think maybe this is the decade where we kind of learn those lessons and maybe create a more welcoming community. Yeah.
Interesting. Nancy?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the future, but I like the idea. Like, yes, education and learning and understanding is important, but sometimes I kind of feel bad for developers. I feel like we're trying to put so much into the load is getting bigger every day, and the amount of information that they need to know to do what we want them to do is, I'm not sure if it's reasonable. And I'm just talking security, and I think they have pressures from other areas as well. So if we can give them tools that they can be creative and do what they want to focus on, which is create and be creative and build, but give them tools that make them do that securely from the start. So all the secure default and the roadmap, the paved road tendencies, like trends. I really like that, because sometimes I do feel bad about how much do they need to know to just do what, because at the end of the day, they have a product to deliver, and I don't think it's reasonable for us to ask that they know so much and put that on just one individual, and then ask them to be faster and to be first to market and things like that. So to better building tools that allow them to build securely without security have it to be top of mind, because it's taken care of for them.
Right. I think, interestingly, one common emotion that both of your answers gave, it's quite interesting, is it's not a decade of technology. It's probably going to be a decade of empathy more than anything else, right? It's probably just going to be that. Just give people a break, right? And just kind of just be more, just have more empathy, I think. Developers for security for each other, and back to what Nikki said back when we started off the show, gone are the days where you could evangelize AppSec by evangelizing fear. Fear mongering does not work anymore, right? It's not just about attack. It's people really want to know about, it's not like selling insurance anymore. I mean, selling insurance has become more subtle these days. So I only can imagine AppSec being something more interesting. So I know we're almost at the end of the show. I want to kind of ask you one, and this is, again, I'm not sure whether you had the opportunity to say this in any of the other platforms, but for people who do follow, and a lot of them who do follow the OWASP Devslop community, what is on Nancy and Nikki's mind in terms of next big things for the community? What can they expect in the next, we're still in March, so what can they expect over the next few months? What do you want to, what's new? What are you going to continue doing, or things like that?
You're working on some stuff, Nikki. Go ahead.
Yeah, we had a Kubernetes Builders TTF about a month and a half ago, and I think we're looking to do more of these like type CTFs where you can, like, it's a CTF, but you're building something and you're learning along the way, and we're trying to figure out like how to do that at scale or at our scale, and how to get the community to feel like they're actually learning something, because I really deeply committed to that. The goal of, at the end of this, you committed your time, you're going to learn something, right? So we like that format of like builder CTFs, and we want to kind of continue down that road. So, yeah.
That's been something new. We only started at the end of 2020, and I'm loving it. Like, it was, we didn't know it's new. Like a DevOps CTF, a bunch of people were like, what are you talking about? I've never heard about that. And the security space has taken, ownership of CTFs, but we're kind of taking it back and say, yeah, we can use it for learners as well and for builders as well. And it's been, the last one we had on Kubernetes been over 2 days, and it was great to see people committed and spending hours on these solutions. So we want more of that, because that's what they want. That's the feedback we got as well. Something I'm focusing on, just building connections and relationship with other communities, and as a developer community outreach, like stop talking to ourselves and just, it's people that are building and don't know, people that I think should know about OWASP and or are the builders of our software but have no idea that we exist. I think that shouldn't happen, and that they should be aware that we're here, because I do think that OWASP has a lot of resources and the information is there. It's just to make it accessible and maybe digestible. Change the format, change how we present it, but the information is there.
Awesome. Sounds really exciting, because like we said, the Devslop is not a typical OWASP project, right? It's not content in the way that you'd expect an OWASP project. It's not a tool. It's really a resource presented in a different format, in a very, very interesting and an encouraging format. So for those of all who've still not checked out the Devslop project, please do so. Thank you, Nikki and Nancy, for participating in this podcast. As always, a pleasure to talk to both of you, and look forward to more exciting episodes.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks. Bye.